Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to The Unspoken Truth. I'm your host, Rob Russ.
And live from Minnesota, I'm Evan Anderson.
Welcome, everybody, to the weekly live. It's great to have you here. It's great to have you here as well. Ed, I love doing these live shows with you and recording this way as well. Folks, if this is your first time here, welcome to The Unspoken Truth. We like to pull back the stories behind the mainstream media and show you exactly what's going on. We're available as a podcast over in Telegram and on Twitter. You can find all of the links to everything that we're talking about in today's show already down below in the description. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about normalcy bias in a crazy world. What's going on? There's a nuclear war threat every other day, and nobody seems to pay any attention or really care. There's a housing crash and an economic crisis that's about to happen as well. Nobody seems to care about any of that, and that's the normalcy bias we're all facing, and we're going to have a bit of a conversation about that. So let's get into today's show. All right, Ed, I want to kick off today by just rearranging the screen here for a second first up, and I want to begin today's show by talking about normalcy bias and what that actually means and the craziness of all of that, because I think that this is something that we all suffer from. Everybody is shocked and alarmed about the news the first time that they see it, but as these news stories develop and as these narratives develop, everyone just goes, oh yeah, okay, cool. There's been a whole lot of Senate estimates hearings here in Australia where they're pulling Pfizer and Moderna in front of these politicians, and the politicians are holding them to account, asking them all sorts of questions. And everyone's like, okay, whatever, man, all these excess deaths, all this stuff happening. I look back at a story I saw yesterday. Dmitry Medvedev, I don't know what his role is in the government in Russia. He holds a fairly senior role in the government, and he's somebody who is full of, the way I describe it, he's full of piss and vinegar. He's always cranky, he's always upset, he's angry, he's not very diplomatic. And he said in the last couple of days, this is just like a few days ago now, Medvedev says Russia could use a nuclear weapon if Ukraine's fight back succeeds in the latest threat. So I looked at what he's been saying. In the last couple of months, he said on more than 54 occasions that Russia would use nuclear weapons. Now, remember that he was the president of Russia from 2008 to 2012. And if you think that getting rid of Vladimir Putin is going to be any better, someone like him is going to take over. So this is what he said, and I quote from CNN, and this is across a couple of sources. So you can see Reuters here, The Telegraph here. There's a bunch of Politico there as well. He said, just imagine that the offensive, in tandem with NATO, succeeded and ended up with part of our land being taken away. Then we would have to use nuclear weapons by virtue of the stipulations of the Russian presidential decree. So every other day he's making these kind of veiled threats, and he's saying here there simply wouldn't be any other solution. Our enemies should pray to the fighters that they do not allow the world to go up in nuclear flames. Now, it's all just rhetoric and it's just garbage, and this guy is a cranky old drunken Russian. That's him if you can't remember what he looks like. But his comments are just so inflammatory that everyone's just like, oh, whatever, man, just shut the fuck up. Like, we're sick of this shit, man. What do you think when you hear this going on all the time? Do you think it's normalcy bias? Do you think it's just rhetoric? What are you hearing?
Well, yeah, I do think it's normalcy bias. I mean, it's kind of human nature, right? At some point, you can only keep up your level of fear over something for so long before you're going to go crazy, right? So you have to. I'm guessing it's got to be a psychological thing in the mind where, as a defense mechanism, your mind kind of has to normalize it, because if it's always going to be, your life is threatened, you go crazy, right? So I think don't you think there has to be something to that where people have to know? I mean, if you get up in the morning, if you're gonna worry about getting hit by a bus by crossing the street, you'll never leave the house, right? So but it is a danger, right? So I think you learn how to incorporate dangers that surround you and make it normal. So I don't know, am I way off here? So I think this has got to be on some level a kind of a human reaction, that if someone is constantly telling you that, yeah, you might be vaporized any day, At a while, you might start to tune it out because you have to. Otherwise, you go nuts if you believe this person all the time. I think you have to.
Well, that's why I'm asking the question. That's why I wanted to raise it. So the next question I've got is it really as bad as what it seems? So what I wanted to do was just to remind everybody to take a step back every now and then, and you kind of hear someone like Dmitry Medvedev say, we're going to go up in nuclear flames, and the four horsemen of the apocalypse are coming for you, and all of this awful rhetoric saying that he's going to use nukes and destroy everybody. And, if Russia can't exist, well, nobody could exist is pretty much what they're saying. Because if you're an existential threat to us and you're going to destroy us, we'll destroy you all. And nobody will live. Everybody will die. It's the story of Cain and Abel, right? That's how they want to tear the whole world down in the eyes of God to please God. It's very, very strange. But if you step back from it for a second and you take the rhetoric out of it, you rewind the clock to early 2019, the start of 2019, and you think, imagine if there was drones attacking civilian buildings in downtown Moscow. You'd be like, what? What? Imagine if there was cruise missiles striking grain facilities in southern Ukraine. You'd be like, what? Imagine if hospitals and schools were being blown up on a daily basis on both sides of the conflict because they're as bad as each other. Imagine if war crimes were being committed on a daily basis. I've stopped downloading videos from Telegram and downloading the war crimes. I watched a video earlier today as I was getting started, as I just got out of bed and started looking at the war and what was going on there, because there's been a few developments. And you can see there's it looks like a tow missile or a faggot missile that the Russians have, their version of a tow. And it's an anti-armor weapon. And you can see there's troops in the open on the horizon, probably about a kilometer away. And these things have quite a long range. So it's a tube-launched missile, and it's optically guided. So somebody's got a little joystick and looking at a screen, and the missile has got a wire connected to it, and it's flying along, and whoever's like driving the joystick, the commands are being given to the missile. But they're firing these anti-armor weapons at a bunch of about maybe 9 troops in the open, and it like lands dead center, boom, and just blows these troops to pieces, right? But when you stop the video and rewind it and look closely at it, it's actually a medical party. There are a bunch of troops carrying what looks like stretchers. So Ukrainians all loud and proud about targeting medical parties. Isn't that against the rules of armed conflict? So if I rewound the clock to 2019 and said, did you know that the Ukrainians were targeting Russian medical parties and destroying them with the weapons that we give to them from NATO? You'd be like, get the hell out of here, man. The Ukrainians would never do that. Did you know that the Russians are using white phosphorus in cities in Ukraine? No, they're not. There's no chance that the Russians would ever use white phosphorus to do that. That's against the laws of armed conflict. You can't do that. Do you know they're using cluster munitions in cities? No, they wouldn't do that. Cluster munitions are meant for armored columns in the open. No, they're doing all of those. All of this is happening. And then, did you know that Dmitry Medvedev has threatened nuclear war 54 times in the year 2022 and 2023? No, there's no way that guy would do that. He's a drunken idiot for sure, but there's no way he would say it. That's what's going on. The world is stark fucking mad. And I look at it every day, and sometimes it gets me down a little bit. Usually I'm pretty not thick-skinned. I'm pretty just like agnostic to it all. Like, whatever, man, it doesn't affect me. I just walk out the front here to the beach. It's the most beautiful place on planet Earth. What do I give a shit about a war in Russia for? But if you let it get to you, it is really, really serious. And we're on the precipice of something really big, I feel. There's a lot of troops in Europe moving their troops closer to the border. There's 3,000 troops in Poland now on the border. The Lithuanians are moving into position. The Estonians are moving in position. What do they know what's actually happening? And then there's one big thing that brings it all to a crescendo where you're looking over here in Europe, and you're looking at the war over here. But over here on the 24th of August, just in a couple of days, in 2 weeks today is the 10th of August, in 2 weeks today, the South Koreans are going to be having one of the biggest military exercises that involves the entire nation of South Korea that they've ever had. So remember, Kim Jong-un is worried that there's going to be a giant buildup of forces before everybody invades. And if the peninsula is surrounded by naval forces, that's a potential indicator that he's about to invade. And he's got his finger on the button, worried that that's going to happen, even though that's not going to happen. Well, maybe it is going to happen. Who knows? But the South Koreans are going to run a nuclear drill where they get everybody into the bunkers. So if the North Koreans do decide to invade, they do decide to do something, everybody needs to know where to go. Where are you at the time when the siren goes off? Well, I'll be at work. So there's the closest bunker there. So we're going to go and get down there and do what the government asks us to do. So what would Kim Jong-un be thinking in North Korea when everybody is going to get into position on the 24th of August? They're all going to get into a bunker. And at the same time, there's a simultaneous military exercise going on. Do you think that he's worried that the invasion of North Korea is about to happen? He's a paranoid dude. He's got nuclear weapons, for heaven's sake. But no one's talking about that. It's just normal, man. It's just another exercise. Don't worry about it, man. Medvedev threatened nuclear war a couple of days ago. Don't worry about it, man. It's going to be okay.
Well,
is it as bad as it seems?
Well, yeah. Well, and you got to wonder, Kim being being the paranoid that he is. You have to wonder whether he's losing his relevancy, right? Hey, no one's paying attention to me anymore. That's why they had that big parade that you
Absolutely
did a report on last week, right? And they pulled out all the stuff, beautiful parade, because he wanted people to know, hey, I'm still here, I'm still relevant, I'm still a threat, right?
And look at our new hypersonic nukes.
Yeah. So when Ukraine and Russia are taking up all the front page
bandwidth,
he's probably feeling a little left out. He might be feeling a little ignored. So maybe he could do something just to stay relevant, which is a dangerous thought, that he might resort to something just to be relevant. The people like Kim Jong-un, where the country has no visible means of revenue, right? They pretty much rely on the good graces of China, right? That's why
drugs, illegal drug trade, hacking. They do have several illegal sources of revenue. But you're quite right.
But no legitimate sources of revenue. So they're kind of resorted to being an extortionist state. And yes. what's their biggest extortion item? A nuclear bomb, right?
Can I go with one more normalcy bias, because you've got that going on today as well in your little report, and I'll kind of bring that to a close here and throw to your one. So in 1996, when I was in the Royal Australian Navy, we went on maritime interception operations in the Persian Gulf, and it was on Operation Damask. That was the name of the op that we did. And we were the first Australian warship to go back to the Persian Gulf since the first Gulf War in 1991, which only lasted, a short period of time, just kind of January, February type thing. And we went back in 1996. And the reason the UN and the Americans asked us to go back there is because the guided missile frigate that we had has got like a relatively shallow draft into the water, so it doesn't go very deep in the water. And the Persian Gulf up near Iraq and around Iran and Kuwait is quite shallow. So we could go all the way up there because the American destroyers couldn't go up there and their cruisers couldn't go up there, and the carrier battle group has to stand off anyway because there's too many threats. So we would go right up there and do the MIO ops, and we would wait for the Iraqi shipping to come out of the KAA, and then we would intercept it. And inevitably, they never came straight out. They always came out and they turned left and hugged the coast of Iran and tried to hide in the oil fields and whatnot. And then we would just watch them over the horizon and go on board them. And they weren't doing anything wrong anyway. We never found anything. Nothing bad ever happened in those operations. But the whole point of me telling you that is, during that part of the world has been a very volatile part of the world, both in the northern part of the Arabian Gulf because of the war and all the things that had happened there, and the Iranians they own the northern part of it, right? So they see it as which one is it? Is it the Persian Gulf or is it the Arabian Gulf? I don't know. I use the terminology interchangeably because depends who the enemy is, right? So the enemy are the Persians now because the Iranians are the enemy, so it's the Arabian Gulf. But when the Persians weren't the enemy, it was the Arabian Gulf. But the Arabs haven't really ever been our enemy. So anyway, no one really knows what to call it. What's the proper name? Who knows? Anyway, down the bottom of that part of the world, the Straits of Hormuz is
called Obama's grave. Yeah,
Bush's Gulf.
Yeah, Bush's. Yeah,
George Bush 1 and George Bush 2, something like that. And now it's MBS's Gulf is the way you would probably describe it more accurately. Anyway, down the bottom of that, the mouth of the Arabian Gulf is the Straits of Hormuz. And when you go through the Straits of Hormuz on a warship, the Iranians know you're coming. And it's a very narrow channel of water. They could attack you pretty easily. They could just put a missile battery there and fire them all at you, and you wouldn't be able to react. They could sink you quickly, right? And they could sink an aircraft carrier there as well. There's a whole range of things that they could do. But we are all ready for those sorts of things. And we have a QRF, we have reactions, and there's all sorts of things that you can do to defend against that. Back in my day, it was something quite different. There wasn't as much of a threat. There was a threat, but not like there is today or anything like that. So for the first time, just in the last couple of days, the Americans have come out and said, we're deploying 1,400 troops and we're going to put them on civilian ships. And we're going to use those troops as a deterrent to the Iranians who seem to be seizing these civilian ships. So they're seizing the ships and stealing the cargo and using them as ransom. And as you kind of pointed out with North Korea, the only thing that they can actually do is use hostile means and illegitimate means because they're sanctioned up to the wazoo and they can't have a legitimate way of actually doing business with the world. So they're resorting to these acts of what you would consider to be terrorism. And the Americans are like, well, no, you don't. They're our assets coming out of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and all of those places on the southern or the western side of the Gulf, if you like. And we need to protect those assets. So normalcy bias just makes me go, oh yeah, they're going to put troops on civilian ships. What? You're going to do what? I just think of like my time in the Navy and my time in the Army as a soldier and as a sailor, like what that actually means. Like being tooled up with double frontline ammunition, with a rifle, with a pistol, with a shotgun, with all the provisions that I need and that. And you're going to be security on that merchant ship over there. Aren't there private companies that do that? Why are you using the military to do that? This must have escalated to a point with Iran that the military has to get involved in it. Because if the Iranians continue to do this and the Americans end up in a shooting match with the Iranians driving fast attack boats at them and suicide boats at them, then this is going to escalate into something else. It's like the Americans are going to go, hang on a minute, one more of those attacks, if you kill one more of our troops, the airstrikes are coming your way. And it's all the excuse that they need for another flashpoint in the Middle East. And it's like, what? Man, the world is the normalcy bias that people have and the lack of reporting of things like that and the flashpoints that we're looking at with North Korea, Medvedev, Iran, and in Africa as well. And everyone's just like, it reminds me of that meme. I've got that meme somewhere on my computer where the little creature is sitting, little doggy is sitting inside the house going, everything is fine, and the house is burning down around them, man. That's actually what's going on. That's the normalcy bias that we're suffering from.
I don't know whether you remember, but when Obama was in office, a popular pastime for the Russians were to buzz our naval ships, right?
Yes.
And we didn't respond. And I was thinking, if I was president of the United States, I'd say I'd give a public speech telling Putin, all right, you
cut it out.
You get one more chance. You can get away with it one more time. After that, we're shooting you down. Everything comes within whatever the range is, they're dead.
We have this thing in the Navy, and all Western navies have this because it's as a result of an accident, a tragic accident that happened in, I want to say 1988, I think it is, where there was an Iranian airliner shot down by a US destroyer in the Persian Gulf, just a little bit away from the Straits of Hormuz, actually. And what it's called, the protocol that you use is called warnings. And there's 7 levels of warnings. Warning like number 2 of 7, and 7's been the gentlest one, 1's been the worst, is be advised aircraft in vicinity of, bearing and range and altitude, you are closing my position on a heading of, if you don't turn away now, I will fire. And warning number 1 is I have engaged you. So I'm telling you that I'm engaging you, and I'm calling you up on the guard frequency on 121.5 or 243, so the aircraft can hear it. There's no doubt about that, because every aircraft has 121.5 tuned in, and every maritime vessel around is tuned into those guard frequencies as well. So when the Chinese intercept you and they talk about those things, in the Straits of Taiwan, get away from here, you can't be, like, get the fuck out of here, man. We can be wherever we want. It's international waters. That's what warning orders are. That's the frequency that they're calling you on. And so it kind of shows, I remember when that was happening, it was actually happening in the Black Sea around Crimea. And I remember that, and like everyone was saying, well, you know, American warships shouldn't be here. How would you like it if we were off the coast of you? You'd be doing the same to us. Which reminds me, just like less than 4 days ago, the Chinese and Russian naval fleets were off the coast of Alaska near the Aleutian Islands.
Yes. How do we not cover that one yet? Yeah.
You know why we didn't cover it? I'll tell you why, man. This is why we didn't cover it. The normalcy bias, man.
Yeah.
It's just the Chinese Navy and the Russian Navy. And so now if I go back to my 2019 analogy and say to you, you know, the Chinese Navy and the Russian Navy will be joined forces and they'll be within a couple of 100 miles. They'll be within cruise missile range, caliber cruise missile range of Alaska. Yeah, no, they won't. The Chinese don't have a blue water navy. Why would the Russians provoke us like that? They're our friends now, aren't they? The normalcy bias that we have is just unfucking believable. But I can tell you in that part of the world, all the submarines would be there going, yeah, right, come any closer and we'll sink all 10 of you in the next 5 minutes. So I don't think that would be really much of a problem.
Well, you know, I think part of it as well is just you got to, is the 24/7 news cycle, is that there is so much coming at us every day. There's so many topics, each one of which is important in its own way. We have to kind of pick and choose in any one day what we're going to pay attention to, right? You know, and
Iran, North Korea, Taiwan, or Ukraine.
Now, I don't know whether this is unique, whether there's this number of important issues, or maybe, you know, it's always been this way, but we just didn't have this efficient, you know, news reporting, out there. I mean, so you got the geopolitical military issues, and then you got the geopolitical economic issues to worry about. Then you got the geopolitical social issues to worry about, and they're all relevant. They're all things you want to talk about. And well, obviously the nuclear stories have to be number one, right? But but when you cover them every day for 3 months solid, there's not a whole.
What did he say again? I don't know. Shit, man. Like, don't worry about it. He's a dickhead, not worth reporting on. Have you seen? He's just a drunk, man.
Yeah, you ask, well, did he say anything different than the other times? Or
no, we just threatened nuclear war again. Total annihilation of everybody.
Okay, check. Move on. You covered that in 4 seconds. Once again, okay, check. It's. I
was thinking about creating a thing of Dmitry Medvedev Mondays. and we'll comment on Medvedev on Mondays and the nuclear rhetoric that he's actually got going on.
Maybe we can also make that a drinking game.
A shot of vodka every time, right?
Yeah.
Man, I'm a lightweight. That's going to hurt me badly. All right, I want to shift gears from the normalcy bias of what's going on there, and let's talk about some economics for a little while here. I think this is a really important topic. We were talking off camera before we hit the go live button here about what's going on with the next housing crisis, and you got some good inside gouge and some good Wall Street analysis coming out there. When you're telling me about that, I'm thinking there's the Wall Street guy that I know right there. There it is. So why don't you set the frame here for us before we throw to your report?
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Okay, well, listen, I do firmly believe that there is going to be another economic crisis. Similar, I think it's going to be far worse than the great financial crisis of 2008 to 2010. It's going to be much worse. And there are reasons why it's going to be much worse. And leading the way is going to be the housing market. The housing market, we're going to see a crash like you've never seen before. And during 2008 to 2010, I know you're about 5 years old then, but it was an unbelievable. Go back and watch movies. There's a Tom Hanks movie that was made during that time. There were periods of month. There were like a 4-month period there where every day we woke up not knowing whether the financial system was going to be around when we woke up. We didn't know what was going to happen to the world financial system.
Well, that was the end of it. That's when money actually died. That's economy actually died. Then it's just been on life support ever since. I've seen Lynette Zhang say that a couple of times. She talks about and we know that for an absolute unequivocal fact that's when the economy died, because the only thing that solved it was all the QE. And we've never seen QE like that. Remember QE1, QE2, QE3, then there was like a contraction of QE, and it's like it just means it's not typing the numbers on the computer today. It's like unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the stock market or the bond market, any of the financial markets, their rally is all based on a sugar high on QE. No fundamentals, no no
No
foundation.
market sentiment
Yeah,
driving that.
yeah. So when you have artificial rallies, they can only last so long. I mean, the government at some point their games are not going to work anymore, and there is going to be hell to pay. It's hard to predict exactly when that day is going to come, but my guess is that when it happens, it's going to happen fast, because between the three emotions that drive the market, fear is the dominant emotion. When people want out, they just want the hell out, and they'll take their loss, but they just want out fast. And it's all a question of who can get out the fastest. It's and whenever that day comes, so the next off is it's going to happen. It's going to be the 2008 crisis unfolded pretty quickly as well, but it really started in 2006.
Yeah.
I won't go into that here, but it really started a couple of years earlier before it actually manifested itself in the public. In the public, and what we have going on right now is what was going on in 2006, including everything from we have now mortgage companies and lenders offering ridiculous things like 0% down, and it's I mean, back the old mistake that caused the same issues as last time. But so they're resorting to tricks because people can't qualify for mortgages anymore. People's credits have been stretched. People's incomes have, well, and I covered this in the report, so I don't want to step on my own report. But there is, I think, a dark horse issue, a dark horse catalyst to the upcoming financial and housing crisis that people are not really considering. And so that's what I highlight in my report. So having said
Before we throw to that report, I just want to offer a couple of comments and ask a question there. It actually goes back to 1999 under Bill Clinton. The crisis goes, the genesis of the end of the economy happened under Bill Clinton when he repealed the Glass-Steagall Act.
Yep.
So people might remember the Glass-Steagall Act when you I just Googled it quickly just to make sure I got it right. So it was designed to prevent commercial banks from speculative risk taking to avoid all of that. So essentially commercial banks couldn't mix the money with retail and residential mortgages and whatnot. And they repealed the Glass-Steagall Act and said commercial banking and retail banking, all the same shit, do whatever you want. And that's when all of the mortgages came out and all the different new financial products, because all of a sudden there was all of this money in the market that they could now give to consumers, and they were just doing whatever the hell that they wanted. So Bill Clinton is actually the one that's responsible for the death of money.
You're absolutely right. Him and Barney Franks does not get enough credit for being a villain in this. Barney Franks passed through regulations that required banks to issue a certain percentage of their loans to low-income people who could not afford the mortgages.
So Bill Clinton was the person who did that, who signed that into law that allowed that to happen. But the real villain, who's the real villain?
Barney Franks.
No, rewind the clock a bit more.
Oh, Greenspan.
No, keep going.
I'm trying to think who you were.
Who's the real villain that completely and totally decimated the American economy? And the world as we know it, for that matter, because the US dollar was the world's reserve currency. Go back to the 1970s.
Oh, well, Nixon?
Yeah, Nixon. Richard Nixon's the one who unhooked you from the gold standard.
All right. Well, yeah.
He unhooked you from the gold standard because there was not enough gold in the vaults to actually keep lending money to the government, and there was no way for them to keep the revenue going because they mismanaged the economy so badly. So he said, and if you rewind a little bit further to the 1930s when they seized all the gold and then pushed the gold price up and the whole thing's a giant circle jerk, eventually that ran out in the 1970s. Richard Nixon went, fuck it, just float the currency, don't worry about it. And then Bill Clinton went, well, how are we going to stimulate the economy and how can I fudge these numbers? And I want to kind of just remind people that, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish your thought.
I was just going to say, I want to remind people that politicians will do anything for a headline. So many years ago, when my missus first started working for New South Wales government, so she was a chef, that's her trade. And in the year 2000, she's like, I don't want to be working, cooking while the Olympics were on here in Sydney. So she got out of chefing, and her first job in government was working for New South Wales Premier's department. And So Bob Carr was the Premier of New South Wales at the time, and people would look at Bob Carr's financial record and say, he was a really good Premier for New South Wales. He did really good things. He was excellent, and all this stuff was going on, right? People saying about it. But the real thing is, the inside gouge is that the guy just didn't spend any money. And what he did is he just put like a moratorium and a freeze on all projects. So there was no more new projects going ahead. So the projects that were underway, they kept going, but there was nothing new that actually happened. So there was no more funding. And what had happened is the amount of revenue that he created made it look like he had done a really good job managing the economy. And he did in that sense. But on the other side of the ledger, he didn't actually do anything because no more financial activity happened. So you actually slowed the economy down, because the time that you're in office, it looks really good because you've got these surpluses and you've got all this money, but then economic activity is slowed down because you've stopped with the investment, because the government's the biggest investor in its own environment, in its own state. So that all went away. And it's just like, that's what Bill Clinton did too. Bill Clinton was a really good economic manager, and he was the only person to have ever balanced the budget in modern times, and blah, blah, blah. But what he did is he destroyed the economy in the process.
Yeah, that's right. And it was the Republican Congress, by the way, who balanced the budget for the first time in decades. It was
not Bill Clinton. That's a furphy, is it? I didn't know that.
Yeah. He was in office, so he got credit for it in the history.
When it happened.
Right. But it was Congress that put together, who were the architects of that first balanced budget.
There you go. Stand corrected.
Listen, there's a lot of blame to go around in the financial world. We can go back to the Jekyll Island crowd in 1913.
That's where it really started.
Yeah. So or how about 1680 when the Central Bank of England was founded? So.
Well, before we throw to your report, I've got a quick question for you. Have you ever seen the movie called The Big Short?
Of course.
You have seen that? I've never heard you talk about it. That's why I'm asking.
Oh yeah.
That's a great movie. Yeah,
great movie. It is. It's very underrated. I think most people didn't get it because it's a pretty heavy movie.
It's highbrow, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's highbrow.
But they do a brilliant job explaining the whole situation there. So anyone who wants to understand, that should be required watching in any kind of economics class, whether collegiate or high school.
I really like that movie because what it does is it shows a guy ringing the bell. He's going, "Oi, oi," and everyone's like, "What are you talking about, man?" No, but he's the thing that saved him and got people to look at what he was doing was his reputation. So he was a bit of a savant in that industry and made some really good predictions in the past. And we've got a lot of those people nowadays. We see a lot of those people in the public discourse on Twitter and in social media and on YouTube predicting the financial future, and they're consistently right. You happen to be one of them, Ed. You've just got a lifetime of experience, and you're consistent in your predictions. And you're saying, well, and whenever something comes true, like whenever a prophecy comes to pass, I always see you go, well, what did you think was going to happen, you dickhead? Like, because the market is just made up of people. And if you're really good at reading the signals and seeing what people are going to do, you'll see what's actually going to happen and what's going to come to pass. But the tricky part is predicting when. And if you can predict the when, then you look like that financial savant to make it happen. There's a lot of people out there that work off data and work off statistics, and they're using the past performance of statistics as it relates to demographics to predict the future. And a lot of that has come to pass as well. A lot of that has been very, very accurate in terms of what's happening in the world. And I look at that and think, I wonder where we're going to be in like 3 years' time. I just think the normalcy bias that we're suffering from, and the report that you're about to show us here is just crazy, because 3 years ago, we could never have imagined where we would be. And it's very hard to predict where we're going to be in 3 years' time as well. Would North Korea have nuked South Korea and everybody else, and they've been completely destroyed? Will Russia use a nuke? Will Iran destroy Israel? Oh my God, like, I think of the geopolitical things like that, and then they're the high-level things. And then you bring those down into the nuances of your society where you live. How does that affect your house prices, your insurance? How does that affect your car, your job, your online income? Oh my God, like, it's very hard to predict where we're going to be in 3 years' time, man. Very, very hard.
Well, it is, and that's why. But that doesn't mean there's nothing you can't do. It's exactly because you cannot, foretell the future, that you need to do certain things. If we knew what was going to happen with the stock market, if we knew what was going to happen to the bond market and when, that'd be easy. Anyone. But the important thing, you want to play a big game of, well, what if? A good CEO or a good CFO, that should be his primary job every day. He should be asking himself, well, what if that happens? He should be looking for things that could come out of left field and plan for it, right? And play defense to a large degree. And you gotta know how to pivot, whether it's sports or whether it's economics or whether it's in life in general. You have to be able to pivot. Now, I am actually by nature a creature of habit, but over my lifetime, I've forced myself to get outside of my comfort zone. And there were some times that I had to get out of my, because things changed. You can't just assume that your life is going to stay the same, in perpetuity. You can't assume that the economy is never going to have a rough day ever again. You can't afford to make those assumptions. So you have to plan for it. So our mantra, there's no downside to our mantra, right?
Exactly.
Reduce exposure to bank, acquire some gold and silver, and establish streams of passive recurring income. Even if we're wrong, those are all good things to do.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing, isn't it? Right, to play both sides of the coin. If the worst case, it's that old analogy: you plan for the worst and expect the best. That's really all you can do in your life. All right, let's throw to your report, and we'll come on back and comment on that once we're finished.
And today I want to talk to you about the upcoming housing crisis and why it is going to be worse than the 2008 to 2010 crisis. So let's get on it. Okay, so there are some warning signs in the housing markets that are not being reported, but you need to know about. There is an awful lot of denial going on in the housing industry and among economists. Okay, so a few days ago, I did a report for you showing you that about 46% of Americans cannot handle a $400 emergency. Number of Americans able to afford $400 surprise bill slides in era of Bidenomics. So almost half of all tax-paying adults do not have enough cash to cover a $400 emergency, an unexpected expense, right? Well, what do you think the percentages are of the people who have mortgages who cannot cover the cost of a 1-month mortgage payment? A lot of people out there are living hand to mouth. Now, there are a lot of realtors out there saying that there is kind of a boycott of people or a seller's strike, people who are refusing to sell their houses because they don't want to. That's not what's going on. Let me tell you what the untold truth is. The untold truth is most people cannot afford to get out of their current house to get into another house because the mortgage that they're currently in was acquired when the mortgage was at 1 or 2 or 3%. So if they sold their existing house and got rid of their existing mortgage to buy a newer house, the interest rate on that new mortgage is going to be more than double. We're talking about more than 100% increase in the interest rates. So a lot of people are in jail. They're in real estate jail, okay? They're staying in their houses not because they want to, but because they have to, because they can't afford any other options. And this is going to lead to a disaster going forward. Now, there are 4 things that make up every mortgage, right? Principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And there's been a recent development that everyone should be really aware of. 2 major insurance companies are pulling out of the state of California, and 4 major insurance companies are pulling out of the state of Florida. They're just leaving these states altogether. People in California who have existing mortgages, they've been getting notices from their insurance companies saying that they're dropping their insurance. Now, right now, you're thinking, well, wait a minute. They have a contract, don't they? As long as they keep up on my insurance payments, they can't do anything, right? They have ways out. There's a few stories of people who have pools in their yard, and the people could not afford the water for their pools anymore, so they drained the pools of the water. And the insurance company flew drones over the house and took pictures of their backyard showing the pool. And they said, hey, that is an unacceptable risk. What if somebody fell in and broke their neck? I mean, having pools is not a good idea, by the way, guys, from an insurance perspective. But whether it's a pool or something else, they're looking for excuses to close out the policies because they're leaving the states of California and Florida altogether. And this affects everybody else in the country. I mean, they're going to be losing a lot of money by cutting out two lucrative states, California and Florida. So they've got to make up those losses by increasing the rates on everyone else in the country. So let's go back to California and Florida, for example. If your insurance company just dropped you because you have a pool in your yard, maybe you live in an area that's prone to wildfires, whatever excuse they come up with. Now, right now you're thinking, well, I'll just go find another insurance company. They're not all leaving the state. Here's the problem. All the other insurance companies, they're going to know that the other insurance company dumped you, and they're going to know why they dumped you. So they're not going to want to insure you either. Now, the terms of your mortgage requires you to have insurance. So you see where I'm going here? So I'm expecting a wave of foreclosures coming up because of this insurance issue. And it's going to start in California and Florida, and then it's going to work its way insidiously throughout the rest of the country. Americans are living hand to mouth. They don't have a lot of money set aside. If half the country cannot handle a $400 emergency bill, they certainly can't happen a 1 month or 2 month backlog in mortgage payments. And I'll throw in this little statistic. For the first time ever, U.S. consumers' credit cards have topped $1 trillion, which tells me that people out there are making ends meet by tapping their credit cards. And I just did a report for you yesterday telling you that there's a big credit crunch going on throughout the country, and lines of credit are being slashed left and right. So now people don't even have that as a fail-safe. So when you consider that we have real estate prices at all-time highs, we have a lot further to fall than we did back in 2008. On the one hand, the upcoming crisis is pretty good news for those of you who don't have any debt, who don't own a house right now, and you want to buy a house, but you're willing to wait a year or two. But this whole process of resetting the real estate market is going to be very painful. And as real estate goes down, every other industry in the country is also going to go down. Okay, so listen, I'm just another guy on YouTube, right? I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not giving you actual financial advice. I'm just giving you my opinion. But I've seen this movie before. So don't let yourself be a victim in any of this. Reduce your exposure to your bank, put a bunch of your money into gold and silver, and establish streams of passive recurring income. And if you want ideas about how to acquire your gold and silver and how to establish your passive recurring income, reach out to us. And as long as I have you trapped here, I want to sneak in another report here. This is on the climate issue. This is out of the hedge. Is Tonga's volcano eruption set to warm Earth? The Hunga Tonga Hunga Hapa'ai undersea volcano eruption in January 2022 was larger than any nuclear blast conducted by the US, and the shock wave was felt worldwide. A new study reveals the eruption, which injected large amounts of water vapor into the stratosphere in an unprecedented way in our lifetime, might cause global temperatures to warm temporarily. Okay, I'm not going to read the whole story, but listen, you get it, right? Why bother with all of these 15-minute cities and electric vehicles? Anything we can possibly do to reduce CO2 can all be wiped out with one volcano eruption. And what are we going to do? Are we going to control volcano eruptions? You climate activists, you need to get a life, because the climate change statistics that you keep leaning on do not hold any water. Ed Anderson, live from Minnesota, signing out.
Did you get it off your chest?
Sorry, man. I couldn't help myself. I had to sneak it in.
Every volcano that goes off, man, releases more CO2 into the atmosphere than all of what humans produce in the last 50 years.
Yeah.
The whole reason that we have an atmosphere is because of volcanoes. But no one ever talks about that, because we needed the CO2 in the atmosphere to grow the trees, to create the oxygen, to create the atmosphere.
Yeah. If you want to be kind to a tree, go fart on it.
Exactly. There it is there. Hey, I got a question about that report and the 50% of Americans can't afford that $400 bill. Did they give you the numbers of how many people they surveyed when they looked at that data?
Yeah, it was 11,000.
Oh, so it was quite a big cross section of people. Sometimes those surveys are only like 1,000 or 2,000 people. So that was a decent cross section there as well. One of the things that I couldn't help think about was, you were talking about that, is big insurance companies leaving the state of California and Florida because inflation and all of the other outside factors there. They're big business decisions that once they leave, they're probably never going to go back. But the smaller insurance companies are usually underwritten by those large ones.
Yeah. They're all intertwined. In that industry, it's a very incestuous industry, right? And uh, yeah, the smaller companies are usually just, like you say, subsidiaries in essence of the larger companies.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So there aren't going to be very many active insurance companies. Certainly not enough to cover the deficit of the big companies leaving. No, it's going to be, and I don't know why the story is not being shouted from the mountaintops. This is a really big economic story.
So what I would say to that is another question: is this actually a deliberate way of doing it? And we always we're talking about the WEF and the deep state and all this other bullshit and this conspiracy theories that people think are crazy, which but are actually all true. Is that their way of actually in? It could. It's like the sneak attack, man. No one would realize that insurance companies are going to be the reason that the whole market comes undone. But it's a very clever way. We're dealing with really sophisticated people. They're
Sure.
really smart. They're really sophisticated. They've got a better marketing and they get a better branding strategy than everybody on the right, and they're winning. And is this like a deliberate way of actually getting it done? It could be. It seems like it might be.
It could be. There won't be any real way to tell unless we get a whistleblower that comes out with some, documents showing conversations between the right people, or until the movie comes out. When the movie comes out, we'll learn all this stuff about what really happened.
Are we going to live another 20 years to see it?
Yeah.
What's it all for? We're all going to die in a nuclear holocaust anyway. Just lie on the ground and say you want to die right now.
But I could see the evil geniuses in Davos making that connection, making that scheme. Well, this is the way we know we want this to happen. This is one way for us to get it done. Yeah, I can see them.
So they just go and threaten those insurance companies that this is what we're going to do. We're going to pull all your funding. You won't exist. You've got to pull out of that state and that state. That's the beginning of the end.
I don't know how much threatening they need to be. They're all part of the same club.
They're all part of it.
So, I mean, BlackRock, they want to buy your house, right? So BlackRock is itching for the next big housing collapse. They're itching for it to happen.
I saw a report on somewhere on maybe Telegram on the way to this live today that New Zealand have done a deal with BlackRock to get to 100% green energy by 2030. And I'm like, New Zealand, how much pollution? When you fly to New Zealand from Eastern Australia, you fly to New Zealand, and as you're flying the approach, the aeroplane will turn left or right depending on where the wind is for the runway, and you can see the other side of New Zealand. Like, the island's not very wide, man.
Yeah,
how much pollution does that island those two islands create? Not much, man. I bet you it's like less than 0.01% of the world's pollution that goes out there. I don't want to say greenhouse gas, I'll say pollution. But then you're going to impose some mandatory 2030 green energy. But what happens when the wind's not blowing and the sun's... Most of the time in New Zealand, the sun is not shining. It's very windy there, but the sun is not shining there. It's always cloudy. It's called the land of the long white cloud. What is wrong with these people, man? It's got nothing to do with green energy.
New Zealand, these are all, there's like, 300 people in all of New Zealand.
Yeah, there's like 400 sheep and 300 people.
And they're all hemp-wearing hippies. So
hippies, man.
So,
it just beggars belief, right? It's hard to make a comment of any sort of, that's rational. There's one thing I want to say about that report. I'll tie it back to what happened to me yesterday. So yesterday I was at a meeting over in Vaucluse, and I timed it right so I could pick up Susie from the office. She goes into the office in the city once a week, and I called her and said, "Oh, do you want me to come and pick you up?" And she said, "Yeah, that'd be nice." And so we kind of got in the car and we drove home together. It was nice. We were hanging out together. We kind of stopped at the beach on the way home, and we were chatting and just hanging out, right? Just doing what couples do. It was really nice. Yeah. And so anyway, we're almost home, and the news comes on the radio, and they're talking about the government passing some policy about something, and it was about housing. And the Labor government have got this bill for a couple of $2 billion to build a whole bunch of public housing. But when you look at the numbers of the amount of money they're putting into it, a couple of $1 billion, whatever it is, divided by the number of houses that they're actually saying they're going to build, it works out to be $83,000 per house, per dwelling. But there's no house on planet Earth that you could build for $83,000, government incentives or not. And then by the time this comes in, you're not going to build a house for another at least 3 to 4 years, but inflation is running away. So the cost of $83,000 in today's money is probably like $65,000 in 3 years' time because they've mismanaged the economy so badly. And so anyway, the Labor government were looking to get support from the Greens to get this bill passed into legislation so they could do it. And the Labor government are going, you need to support us, you need to do this because you're saying that you want public housing, but we're giving you public housing, spending all this money, and you're not supporting it. So which one is it? You can't have it both ways. And the Greens are saying, we'll support you, we'll do that, even though it's shit. We'll do that, but what you need to do is to freeze rents. And when they said those two words, freeze rents on the radio, Susie goes, she's in the car, she goes, what? Well, you can't freeze rents. Ah! It's like,
good for Susie.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was like. Aha! We went near the electric fence, and she
Yeah.
she got zapped by it, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And I thought to myself, that's like the Greens Party don't realize that they want to freeze rents because they want to help Aussie battlers, but what they don't realize is that they would undermine the entire economy at the same time. And the reason I'm kind of mentioning that is because these insurance companies in America that pull out of these two states are going to undermine the entire fabric of society because it's a domino effect. If it's not working in those states, the other companies there are like, you know what, they're right. Maybe it's not going to work here for us either. So we're gonna get out of here too. And this has got nothing to do with legislation. This has got to do with the actual capitalism and the market sorting itself out.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Insurance companies are the best accountants in the world. They're the best at figuring out. That's their job. Their job every day is to think about risk. Well, what if this happens? What if that happens? Right.
That's what those actuaries do, right?
That's right. Those actuaries, right? And so they look at California and Florida and say, hey, this is a bad risk. You states are bad risks for all things, all the issues. It's never one little issue. They take in aggregate. It's not a good business decision for us to be here. And we can kind of follow the breadcrumbs here because it's going to have a deleterious effect on the rest of the country because these are major companies that they've got to make money. So they're going to be increasing the premiums for everyone else in the country to make up for that loss of revenue, and which is going to give us mortgage holders in Ohio the same issue as the mortgage holders in California. They can't afford it anymore. And people right now, Americans right now, they have no real wiggle room in their budget anymore. It is not according to the stats that I'm looking at. 46% of Americans can't handle a $400 emergency. It's tough. So imagine what will happen if some of these people start losing their jobs because of AI or because of inflation or what. I say this thing could unravel real fast. Because,
yesterday you're 100% right, Ed, because especially about the AI thing, I had like a 2.5 hour meeting yesterday about AI and about projects that we were working on and products we're building. And, I sat back with my third cup of coffee and, on this caffeine high, getting a little bit jittery. I don't normally get jittery from coffee, but I was a little bit jittery. And I said to my mate, listen, man, should we even be doing this? And he said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? What an opportunity. And he's like, and I said, look, just step outside of yourself for a second. Forget about the economics of it, the amount of money we could make and the opportunity, all that. Just step outside of yourself and just ask yourself as a man, should we do this? Because we're going to render so many people obsolete in the process. And he goes, well, if we don't do it, they're going to render us obsolete. We might as well be the ones doing it. And I thought, well, yeah, that's the lesser of two evils, isn't it? But the reality is that people are trying to capitalize on the revolution that AI is. Like when iPhones came out, I've got an idea for an app. I've got an idea for some AI stuff that will, but the consequence of the thing that I'm building is quite different to the consequence of me just building some random app that goes on your phone. The consequence of the app is me trying to get some upside and make some money. But AI is going to render a whole lot of people useless because I've got a good way to use it, and I've got and I can manipulate it. I'm smart enough to manipulate it into a thing that other people will want. And in the process of doing that, it's like the people that now want it look at the people that they're paying at the moment and go, you know what? I don't need to pay those people anymore. Don't worry about it. So their clients systematically fall away, and we're sort of unwillingly and unwittingly destroying elements of the industry that we work in because we've created robots to render them useless. But my mate's right when he says, well, better us doing it than somebody else. At least we get the upside of it, and that's how we're capitalizing on it, right? And that's the capitalist society. If the business works, then we get the upside. If it doesn't work, well, so be it. But there is a consequence to those actions, and it's a pretty severe one as well. And to your point, if people are made obsolete by AI, meaning freelancers that are working from home, that are unable to get jobs in offices because of COVID and everything that happened, so they shifted gears into something like that. Now they've been made redundant and obsolete because of a robot. Like, what? That's a humans are going to be used for entertainment and for sport by the elite. I can really see that, man, in the Hunger Games. I can see it. It's real.
Well, and this circles back to our message earlier in the show, is the importance of being nimble and the importance of being willing and able to pivot. Don't, and as you know, one of the programs that I'm in is an AI related program related to trading. It's the first. Now there are plenty of trading platforms out there that will, you hand over the PAM account, right? You turn over your money, they trade it for you, they keep a percentage, and then give the rest. Well, this one is the first AI developed platform of that kind. And so it is one of the programs. I won't mention it here because it's not appropriate, but if people want to know about it, they can reach out and ask about it. But there is a case where I am taking advantage of AI. I don't want to be a victim of it. I'm going to take advantage of it. Yeah. And actually, my advice these days for people who want to learn how to trade is why. Why do it? You're not going to.
Why do it? The robot can do it for you. Yeah. Exactly. Well, that's probably a good place to wind up the show there. Of asking that question, what can you do next? Well, my view is, what can you do to profit and get some upside? Well, you need to position yourself. You need to reduce your exposure to the bank so they don't seize all of your assets when they inevitably go away. You need to create some passive recurring income, and you need to take the money that you've got out of the bank and put it into a real asset like gold and silver and preserve its value at the time that you actually do that. You're not buying gold and silver to make money, folks. You're buying gold and silver to preserve the value of your currency in today's value. So when we're doing it today and inflation runs away, the price of gold runs up, you'll be able to keep up with it, and you've preserved it nicely in there as well. Ed, have you got any closing remarks as we end the live for the week today?
Yeah, I did settle on some a new set of pronouns, so everyone should be aware of.
What are they?
Yeah.
Are they financial ones?
Yeah. From now on, I am master and commander. So I want to be referred to as master and or commander whenever you. Otherwise, I'm going to be really offended.
Okay, Commander, that's a nice way to round out the show. Let's get out of here. We'll see you next week for the live, everybody. Bye for now.
God save the Queen.
God save the Queen.